Now, I am forever looking for speakers who have can do something differently, different perspective, different interests, different areas. Tonight we're going to reach an area that we really haven't touched on before, and that is actually several areas. One, inside information from the California Rifle and Pistol Association. For those of you who don't know it, been in existence for many, many years, been involved with legislative stuff in Sacramento. Often every month they publish a newsletter on various bills. A lot of great information in there. If you're not a member of CRPA, please join. But the CRPA also sponsors and works with competitive shooting. And other than some meetings we've had with lady shooters, we really haven't discussed that issue at all. Tonight, we are fortunate to have someone who not only is a board member of the CRPA, is a competitive shooter, and is also a member of the Sunnyvale Rod and Gun Club. And here to speak with us tonight is an individual who fits all those three, and his name is John, and believe it or not, his nickname is Skippy Yarborough. Ladies and gentlemen, John and Skip Yarborough.
Thank you. Some of you, of course, know me. Some of you don't. Hopefully through the course of tonight, we'll get to know each other a little better. As Mark mentioned, I'm a competitive shooter. I'm a member of the board of directors of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, and I belong to the Sunnyvale Rod and Gun Club as well. You gotta have a place to shoot around here. Hopefully you all support your local clubs. Hopefully you support organizations that are behind what we're behind. If you looked at the website, it lists me as an IDPA shooter, which I in fact am not. I shoot NRA conventional pistol. That's the main game I play. Formerly known as Bullseye or 2700. It was a real popular game 20 years ago. Some of y'all might have played it back then, and it's pretty much petering now. The question I want to discuss with you guys tonight is a question I had to answer for myself, which is why should a competitive shooter belong to the California Rifle and Pistol Association, CRPA, and you'll hear me refer to CRPA tonight at length. So the first question I'd like to ask you guys is how many of you are now members of the CRPA? Show of hands. Pretty good turnout. Okay, great. So kind of half and half. So maybe through the course of tonight we can explore why the rest of you might want to join the CRPA. In a nutshell, it's a really simple argument. What's politics run on? Two things, numbers and money, right? The more money you got, the more numbers you represent, the more they listen, the more they have to pay attention to you. Because when you call them up and you talk to your either local representative, state, city, council, and you say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I think that you should vote no on X or Y. And of course, we're about Second Amendment issues here. And they think about that for a minute, and they say, well, okay, that's just one person. But now how do you increase that view? How do you increase that power? You form organizations like we have here tonight around goals, around purposes. And now when you call and you say, hi, I'm so-and-so from the Golden State Second Amendment Council, they might pay a little bit more attention because they know that that's one person, probably has a bunch of other people with him that think that same way. So now if we start scaling that up, and you get on the phone and you call Arnold and you go, hi Arnold, we would like to have you think this way, or here's how we think, and you represent instead of 1, 10, 1,000. CRPA's membership currently is about 34,000 people statewide out of 30 million. Pretty poor number. Let me get into CRPA itself, give you some background on the CRPA, talk about some of the organizations, and we'll kind of go from there. CRPA itself was founded in 1875. They've been around a long time. This is not a flash in the pan, just come lately organization. CRPA's goal is to defend the rights of law-abiding citizens to responsibly use firearms for self-defense and the defense of their loved ones, for sport and all other legal activities. And that's the challenge we're facing right now, where they want to define what is a legal use of a firearm. Do I have the right to have a firearm in my home? First of all, that's in San Francisco, lots of what. Beyond that, what is a legal use of a firearm? So now that's our goal, defending that. California Rifle and Pistol Association is a nonprofit association, has an independently elected board of directors, representing, like I said, approximately 34,000 members. Members include law enforcement officers, prosecutors, professionals, firearms experts, and loving parents. I don't know where they cooked that one up, but it is true as well. Sometimes I don't love my kids so much, I gotta tell you. Those of you who have kids can probably relate. CRPA works to reduce the criminal misuse of firearms and firearms accidents while actively promoting and organizing competitive shooting sports and Olympic training programs in California. Okay, that's the boilerplate of our mission statement, guys. What's it mean in nuts and bolts? California Rifle Pistol Association has a full-time lobbyist in Sacramento. So when you join the CRPA and you pay them your $10 for the yearly membership, where do those $10 go to? One of the things it goes to is to pay for a lobbyist. We have a full-time lobbyist in Sacramento. A lot of the other organizations that are out there, pick one, IDPA, American Trap Shooters Association, USA Shooting, etc., they may or may not be politically active. Most of them aren't, quite frankly. They can't afford to take that risk. They're nonprofits. They don't want to get into anything beyond sanctioning shooting sports, which is great. I'm not here to knock those people. Don't get me wrong. We all need each other in this game. But what they don't have is a political component to them. What the California Rifle and Pistol Association is, at the end of the day, is a political action committee. That's really what they're about. It's political action. Along the way, we need ways to draw like-minded individuals in, because we need those numbers and we need those dollars to play that game. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. It would be counterproductive for me to do that. So what's that mean to you as a competitive shooter? Depends on the game you play. It'd be real easy to join American Trap Shooters Association, go shoot trap matches, have your matches, get your card punched, become a AA shooter, do real good. What if, however, some enterprising individual who lives 120 miles to the north of us decides what they really want to do is limit the availability of certain shotguns? Semi-automatic shotgun, that's an assault weapon. And then most of you probably don't shoot them doubles with a Remington 1100. But there are people out here who have that idea. So from a competitive shooter's perspective, that's what we're about. How do we stop those crazy laws from getting passed? I'll give you another great example in the state of California. The state of California, I think as we all know, has the approved handgun roster, right? You have to buy a new handgun in California. It's got to be on the roster, it's got to pass their drop test, etc. Like I mentioned, I'm a pistol shooter. There are some pistols that we like to use that aren't on that list. They are deemed unsafe in the state of California. And if you think about things like there's a game called Free Pistol, and in Free Pistol, 500-gram trigger on a free pistol is considered a pretty heavy pull weight for a free pistol. Some of those are literally buttons, electronic buttons. Bing, 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 bing. No pull at all really on those. They won't make it through the unsafe handgun drop test, etc. However, there's also, and how many of you know about this, the Olympic exemption list. Any of you all heard of this? Olympic exemption list? I see a few out there. So there's a separate list they maintain, but they don't talk about. And there's input that comes into that list to the state DOJ about, okay, these guns here are used in Olympic level shooting, so they're okay. They bypass that roster. So the state on one side of their mouth is saying, well, you've got to do all these things to have a legal handgun. On the other side of their mouth, they're saying, but these over here are okay. Typical for, I think, the people that live up in Sacramento. Now, how do guns get on that list? They get on that list with advice from members of USA Shooting and members of active competitive shooters. So USA recently sent around a list to all the competitive shooters that they could think of and said, hey, can you give us some suggestions for new guns that are out there that you want to have on the Olympic exemption roster? So one of the guns I shoot is a Hammerly SP-20. If you take a narrow definition of the assault weapons bill, has it got a forward magazine? Check. Does it fire center fire? Check. Does it have a prominently protruding pistol grip? Check. Because it's a pistol. Nevertheless, by the California laws, it's an assault weapon. Now, the chances of me taking you out with a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson long full wad cutter, pretty slim, right? But nevertheless, in their mind, that's an assault weapon. It's also on the Olympic exemption list, so I can have it. Which way do you want it? Okay? That's the challenge we face. That's the mentality, and you guys are painfully aware of this. I know I'm preaching to the converted here. Remember, what we're talking about tonight is why, and like I say, this is a question I had to answer for myself. Why would a competitive shooter want to join the CRPA? Well, it's to stop stupid laws like that from happening. I'll give you another example. This is a really tough one. How many of you are familiar with the Civilian Marksmanship Program, CMP, formerly ODCMP? And we all have that goal of becoming a distinguished shooter, either distinguished rifle shot or distinguished pistol shot. Well, to play that game, you need to shoot a service rifle. Great, service rifles commonly available. We're talking AR-15 platform in the civilian for service rifle, or M1, or M14 if you could get it. So if you didn't buy your AR back in the day and have it registered in California, you're a new person who wants to decide later on in life you want to learn to play this game, can you go buy an AR in California and play this game? Nope, you're hosed. So this is one of the things where California Rifle Pistol Association works with Chuck Michel, and I think a few of you have probably heard Chuck speak before, familiar with who he is. Similar to Don Kilmer, he's an attorney who specializes in Second Amendment issues. If you go apply to get go buy a new AR and you get denied, you apply for that assault weapons permit and you get denied, contact Chuck, give him your information, because we're trying to get a case together to say, look, you're denying lawful use to competitive shooters of service rifle in a nationally sanctioned program. Right now, they finally decided Sacramento County had that case, right? You get a bullet button on your AR. Well, that works great till you're doing the mag load for the prone position. That doesn't work so well in prone. It's a real pain. But these are the types of things that we're trying to address. And what that comes from is membership in the CRPA. That we have those numbers, we have those people to go out and do those types of issues. Talked a little bit about competitive shooting events themselves. As we know, the NRA is kind of the mothership, and in fact, the NRA got founded not around political action, but around competitive shooting. That was a lot of what the NRA was about in the beginning, 100 plus years ago. It was really about competitive shooting. Because as was mentioned earlier, up until the 30s, there wasn't a whole lot of legislative problems with playing the games. It was just being able to go out and play the game, having a sanctioning body. One of the things the NRA does is they recognize states associations, and the states associations are the groups that are empowered to hold state championships. So when you want to have a state championship in a given discipline, it has to be sanctioned by the state association. This is the NRA's logic, okay? In California, that group is the California Rifle Pistol Association. The California Rifle Pistol Association, I will definitely tell you, has a checkered career at this. And I think that's putting it mildly. Some of you are probably more aware of the history than I am, as a matter of fact. They haven't been very consistent, especially lately, about having championships in different disciplines. They can be kind of erratic. In fact, 3 years ago, they were going to have a state pistol championship. They had advertised it. It was going to be held at Santa Margarita Range down in Pendleton. People had made plans, going to travel the whole bit. And on the Thursday before the match was to come, the CRPA lifted their sanction of that match. That was after they had advertised it and announced it. That pissed some people off, myself included, because I had taken time off and was planning to go shoot this match, State Conventional Pistol Championship. So I called them up and I said, what's the problem? Why didn't you have this match? Why did you cancel it at the last minute? They said, oh, well, the paperwork was wrong and they didn't have insurance. I'm thinking, this is happening at Camp Pendleton, a federal facility. I don't think there's a lot of insurance required here, but I thought to myself. So I called the NRA and I asked the NRA, I said, NRA, I called, what's Mike's last name? Anyway, he's no longer pistol director, Mike Craig. I said, hey, you also blessed this match, said this would be the state championship, and now it's canceled. What happened? NRA's answer was classic. They said, oh, it's a state problem, we don't know. I said, okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. It's things like this that used to cause me to have a bad opinion of the CRPA. I wasn't going to be a part of them. I didn't want to have anything to do with them. But then I realized, was that hurting the CRPA? They could care less, quite frankly, whether or not they had one member less or one member more. Through time, from getting to know some of those guys, what they said to me instead was, Skippy, why don't you join the board and let's fix that problem? So 3 years ago, we had no state pistol championship. 2 out of the last 3 years, we've been able to have a state conventional pistol championship. And in fact, this year altogether, we're going to have 9 pistol championships. We're trying to get to where we're predictable and reliable about having these championships, so the people who are playing these games know they have a place to go play it and where to go play it. Why would you play it? And now I'm focusing on pistol because I'm a pistol shooter. We also have committees in other areas, silhouette, high power. Those really are blessed by the NRA because for a long time the CRPA has had a very NRA-centric focus in the types of championships it was going to hold. This year they are adding an IDPA championship. they're looking at reaching out to other sanctioning bodies. They're starting to piggyback on top of USA shooting events as well. So that now, instead of being strictly aligned with the championship program of it has to be blessed by the NRA, we just made a bylaws change. The bylaws change says any recognized sanctioning body. So now we're able to reach out and offer essentially what is becomes a double championship at that point. To where if you're, they're going to have IDPAs going to start down in LA. They're going to have an IDPA championship, one of the stages of which will also go and be the state championship. So now what we're saying is, if you're having an event, we want to be part of it. We want to have your people work with us to work on our areas that we have of common interest, which is the right to keep and bear at the end of the day. Because if you can't keep and bear, you can't go play these games. And let's see how we can do that. So that's the vehicle, and that's the route we're looking at. Those of you tonight that are here that belong to other bodies and are interested in extending this concept, please feel free to talk to me afterwards, okay? I know there's a bunch of groups out there. You know, there's International Trap Shooters. There's also SASS, Single Action Shooting Society, SAS. You know, and cowboy shooters are very popular and very successful these days. There are about 70,000 plus SAS shooters right now, and what I'm told is about 30,000 of them live here in California. They originated that game here in California. We're trying to figure out how could we have a state championship with them, because they have in the trail where they've already got their championship program figured out. They know when it is, what they're going to do, where they go. We would like to have those people work with us as well. Now, in the case of the Single Action Shooting Society Championships, it's very different than the way we think, because it's a 3-gun game. And CRPA right now is only thinking 1 gun at a time. Well, you had a pistol championship, you had a rifle championship. We're trying to figure out how we could have a shotgun championship. Well, if you go look at the SAS stage, they shoot all 3 in one string, right? So many pistols, so many rifles, so many shotgun, that's your stage. So that's going to be interesting for us as to how we change our mindset to host and have that kind of event. But that's where we're going. That's what we're looking at. How do we bring those people in? How do we become more active for them so that they in turn can work with us so that when we go, we've been stable at about 30K members. If you look at our membership trend, 15, 20 years ago it was about 50K. They've trended down to 30, below 30K. We're trending back up now. We want to be 100K, at least 100K people, so that when we have that lobbyist out there talking to them, and we get on the phone to Arnold, or whoever we have in the future, that they have to pay more attention. They can't so quickly dismiss us out of hand. And this is another challenge we face, and I think you guys face it too, I'm sure you do, which is we tend to be fractious in nature. The different gun rights organizations, we tend to be kind of single focus. How do we all pull together in a broader area? That, at the end of the day, is a big part of it. If you look at, what has the CRPA, this is a question I had to ask myself, and I had to ask other board members, what has the CRPA done for competitive shooters lately? The classic question, what have you done for me lately, right? The answer I got back from them was kind of boilerplate kind of stuff, and I wanted to dismiss it out of hand initially. They said, well, C.D. Michelle wrote one of the amicus briefs for Heller. Yeah, congratulations, who didn't? I think they had a pile of them probably this high. And, we worked to get the gun ban in San Francisco overturned. And again, I said, well, congratulations, who hadn't? And then I had to think about it some more. And I said, well, you know what? If they hadn't, and if everybody else hadn't, nobody would have. So that probably is a pretty big deal. These are the challenges we face, though. How do you get that done? Going forward, that's obviously, like I mentioned, on the AR. So those of you that want to get an AR, if you're interested in shooting CMP and you applied to get your permit, let us know. That's one of the things we're thinking about. My focus tonight really tends to be about competitive shooting. Of course, the CRPA is active in a lot of other areas beyond competitive shooting. They mentioned the Firing Line. So the Firing Line is our monthly publication that goes out to members. It has a large selection about legal action, because we are about legal action. At the front end, it gives you a list of the current bills, our position on them, the state of the bills, both forward-looking and historical. Those are the things that are out there we need to think about. Looking ahead, I'm kind of giving you on where we're at and what we're up to, and I've talked a little bit about looking ahead, trying to expand our list of championships. The other thing, obviously, we need to think about is what? Junior shooters. Where are the new shooters coming from? I think that's a big issue for all of us, especially with some games. Air rifle is not too hard to get a parent to think, well, air rifle might be okay. Rifles in general, not too tough a sell. Pistol, lots of luck. We're really struggling with finding ways to get new junior pistol shooters out there on the line playing the game. This year's state pistol championship featured one junior. Guess who was the state champion? Gotta like them odds, right? He's a sweet kid. I like Phil. He's a great guy. But, you know, he's 14. He's learning to play the game. Hopefully he can stay and continue to play the game later. On the other hand, Rifle junior program is doing good. They've got a group up in Lincoln that's great. They've got a group up in Sonora that's really good. And in fact, this year at Camp Perry, at the national matches in the what they call battle rattle match, or battle rifle, what's it, infantry rifle match? It's a battle rattle rifle match is the nickname for this game. It's played with service rifles. What they do is they shoot first the long line, then they shoot a mid-range, they shoot a short range. As you get closer and closer and closer, the point count goes down. And for the last about 40-odd years, this match has been won back and forth between the Army Marksmanship Unit and the Marine team. And they pass this trophy back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Well, for the first time since the 30s, this match was won by a civilian team. And for the second time ever, this match was won by juniors. You don't think right now in Fort Benning and in Quantico, there are a bunch of people with pissed off attitudes because they got beat by a bunch of kids from California? Yeah, buddy. Yeah, battle rattle. It's an interesting concept. What they do is, you know, a lot of like the game I play, the courses of fire are very defined. Slow fire, 10 rounds in 10 minutes and 50 yards. Load and be ready. And we click them off. Battle rattle, they say, here's 384 rounds per shooter. We don't care where you shoot them. We don't care when you shoot them, but you do have a time limit. I think they give them 50 seconds. And they start at the long line, 600 yards. And they have 6-man squads firing and a coach. And they have to come up with a scheme that says, well, do I want to take the long shots for the higher point value, or do I want to take my chances up at the short line where the point value is lower but increase my number of hits? It's a very interesting game to play. Like I said, they won it. That's going to be interesting to see. I hope those kids continue to do well. That's a pretty neat concept. So there's a lot of dichotomy in juniors between pistol, rifle. If you go out to an ATA match, you go to a South Bay Trap Lake, you go to a PETA, you'll see some juniors out there with a shotgun shooting clays. In general, though, one of the things we're working on is junior development. Where do we find these kids? How do we encourage them? How do we support them? CRPA has a problem in their bylaws. The bylaws said if you win at the state championships, you can be the state team at the national championships. Great, good idea, we like that. And not only that, we're going to fund you $250 a shooter. Great, we like that. Well, poor Phil was one kid who showed up and won the state championship. He's going to go to Camp Perry. Because we didn't have the 3 other shooters to form a team, CRPA couldn't help him. In our February meeting, we're making a bylaws change to fix that. So if you only have one kid who shows up, you know what, we're going to support him rather than the team, because that's all we have, but that's what we got to do. Then hopefully the word will get out there. And I know that kid was breaking concrete with a sledgehammer in his uncle's yard to raise money to go to Camp Perry, because I saw him there. You know, he took the clinic, he shot, he's willing to put the effort out there. But we need to find a way to change that as well, and we are. Like I said, we're going to fix that. That was a bylaws thing. We proposed to change our last meeting a couple weeks ago up in Sacramento. We're going to have a southern meeting down in February. We'll put that bylaws change through. Next time around that happens, even if there's only one junior on the line, you know what, we're going to support them. Because that's what we've got to do. Those are the challenges we face going forward here. In a nutshell, I think I've given you an overview of what the CRPA is about, how they are working with competitive shooters, how we plan to work with competitive shooters. At this point, I'll take questions from the floor.
Sir, review literature for signing up.
Fresh out. Some recruiter I am, huh? I know you can go online to the website, of course, that's a pat answer. One of the things we're trying to do, by the way, is be more active at the gun shows. Getting a table and signing folks up at the gun shows. Yes?
Well, along the same line, what is your website? When do you meet? Where do you meet? How often do you meet?
Sure. Okay, so California Rifle Pistol Association holds 2 meetings a year of the board of directors. The members are welcome to attend at the board of directors meetings unless we go into closed session. They don't really meet per se beyond that. It's a little odd in that regard. So the 2 annual meetings are in the fall up here in the north, sometimes here in Santa Clara, other times up in Sacramento, and down the south for the gala banquet. Last year we had, I'm going to draw a complete blank now. Wayne LaPierre is the featured speaker, keynote speaker. This year it's Isaac Piazza, the fellow from Gunside.
Ignacio.
Ignacio, thank you. So the gala banquet is always in the spring down south. That's a big event. The northern event is typically just a functional business meeting, but the members are encouraged to attend. Now, when you second question, I apologize.
Whether, where, when, how.
Where, when, and how. Okay, so I've covered all the above, I believe. Jim?
Yes. Come to our next meeting. Can you bring us some paper material?
Sure.
Okay, I'll buy your dinner at the next Rod and Gun Club dinner.
Hey, now wait a minute. Once a month I take Liz out to this little place I know in the hills. And she's a good sport about it. She plays along. So for those of you who aren't in on the in-joke, Santa Clara Rod and Gun Club, or Santa Clara Rod and Gun, first Thursday of the month, come show up, we'll feed you. Sir.
Do you do any training to pull in new shooters and young people and women? And
They're starting a women's program. They're trying to get active in those areas. For a long time, they've been very dormant on the shooting and very focused on the politics part of the organization. They've had a large turnover in their top level people recently because of that. Sir.
Earlier you were talking about the dysfunctional firearm laws and the conflicts between them. Been reading more and more in the paper that opposing political sides are starting to say that everything in the laws of California are like that, and possibly pushing for a constitutional convention. What is your insight or opinion on how that would be on gun laws, positive or negative?
I can only express a personal opinion there. I don't know what the CRPA's position is on that because I haven't heard it discussed. Is it a good thing? Probably not, given the number of whack jobs that we have here. Unfortunately, they seem to hold sway in any type of event. Personal opinion, strictly. Yep.
The relationship between the NRA and the CRPA.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. NRA and CRPA, they are 2 wholly separate organizations. As I mentioned earlier, from a state perspective, from sanctioning championships, we are the ones who do that as anointed, if you will, by the NRA. Now, the relationship between the two, this actually did change recently. For a long time, the NRA, they're a very active organization, traditionally at the federal level, somewhat at the state level. You know, they definitely pick their state issues and will work state issues as well as federal issues. Going back about just over a year ago now, we formed an ILA with the help of the NRA. The NRA said, you know what, you guys, to be more politically active, you need to go ahead and break off the fundraising parts of this and the monies parts of this and disassociate that from the nonprofit that is the CRPA. So we have founded very similar to NRA ILA, there now is CRPA and ILA. They helped us establish that, get that going. They helped us financially as well as motivationally with that, because the NRA has recognized that a lot of the bad gun legislation starts where?
Here. California.
Here we go. And they realized that, you know what, if we fought this at the state level more than at the national level before it was too late, that probably would be a good use for our resources. So that is definitely an alignment that you're going to see more and more of between them. Like I said, we had Wayne LaPierre speak. We had Ron Schmeitz as well was there. That's the current president of the NRA. Schmeitz is an interesting character. In some ways more personable than LaPierre. I don't want to say anything bad about LaPierre, but he is a real lightning rod type person, right? I mean, love him or hate him, that's how it is. Schmeitz, I think, is a little warmer person. He may be able to be a little more effective than Wayne has. Going to leave that at that. Yep.
Okay, one of the things that we're doing as an organization is trying to involve more children, focus on getting ladies involved and stuff like that. But once again, it often comes down to money. Ammunition is expensive, et cetera. Are there any programs that the CRPA has that we could draw upon to help us with these programs?
Unfortunately, not at this time, no. And it's a challenge we're all facing right now. I mean, you go to CMP to get cheap ammo to run juniors programs, right? Or you try to talk to one of the local shops about, hey, we're going to have a juniors. Like, how do we do those kinds of things? I think at some levels, the small clubs are more active with the juniors than anybody else at this point. Like I mentioned, the case in point, the group in Sonora, they get a very active, very successful juniors program. I know there's one small club here in town. They put on a BB gun shoot every summer for the Cub Scouts. Get them going. That's Sunny Vale Rod and Gun. I can't blow my own horn too much, but that's what we do at the gun club. I said too much. Didn't say which way.
You're among friends.
Yeah, no, I understood. So, that's the kind of things that you do. And they have a day camp. The Cub Scouts come up. They get to shoot a BB gun. They get to shoot a bow and arrow. And we get to try and break that image in parents' minds that guns are bad. Then we carry that through to Boy Scouts. I've been able to work with the Boy Scouts lately, to work with the Boy Scouts to get their Boy Scout rifle marksmanship merit badge. A lot of those kids, the one time they ever shoot a gun is in the scouting program at Ojedo. They come back from Camp Ojedo, they have nowhere to shoot around here. So we've opened our club up to help those kids get those merit badges. That's a lot of fun as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Does CRPA get any of the Friends of the NRA funds? And if not, is there a way that we could maybe channel some of it in the future for some of these other projects?
That's a question I just don't know the answer to. Let me see. I'm gonna have to ask.
I think it'd be a good source for you if
I know they help us out to get the ILA going, and I don't know if they get Friends of NRA money or not.
It's just an application for a grant.
Oh yeah, we apply for grants, that's for sure. Sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. On working with other groups, reaching out to other groups, we are trying to get a women's shooters program going again as well. We do have some lady shooters on the board with us that work on that. The other area really for a long time the CRPA has been blind to has been anything that wasn't played with a rifle or a pistol. Any of the shotgun games, they have no concept of shotgun games, be it trap or skeet, and we're trying to reach out there. We have an exploratory committee going now on that. Like I mentioned earlier, they're very aligned on NRA programs, and they're trying to break that. Yes, ma'am.
It's like a lot of the juniors are probably home playing video games. Too bad we couldn't get a video game that kind of led them right into going to the range.
That's subversive.
A lot of video games are first-person shooters, and I think that's why they're not going to the range, is that they think they're shooting.
Yeah.
And if you want to get into, I'm going to go into personal opinion mode again. Bear in mind, I'm going to express personal opinion, strictly speaking. Take my CRPA hat off. There are other things out there that are detracting from shooting sports for kids: paintball and airsoft. As far as I'm concerned, those are really bad ideas. I mean, I would be a liar not to stand here and tell you I didn't have a BB gun war or two when I was a kid. But that stupid Red Ryder, that little fake marksman, 1911 that was a spring-powered, might get a BB from here to the back room. Other than, you could put an eye out with it. I won't say that you couldn't do it, but you really couldn't hurt each other with those. Go look at some of those airsoft guns. Go look at some of those paintball guns. They hurt, and B, they do not teach muzzle safety. Neither did BB guns, okay? Like some in personal mode, we age, we change our views. Sir?
Well, they're bad because they teach you to shoot people.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And there's nothing wrong with shooting people. There's some that deserve it. But as a hobby or a sport, it's probably not a good thing.
There.
Was that official CRPA?
No, see, my hat's still right there.
It's still off.
Exactly. No, I'm right there with you. I really think, and I love the one. I think this is hysterical. Well, the airsoft gun has to have an orange muzzle on it so we know it's not a real gun. Yeah. Give me my spray paint. Give me my 1911. You tell me whether or not this is an airsoft. Yeah, go ahead.
Another problem with the video guns, they're assault weapons.
And I could go on at length in that area, but I think there's kind of really three things that are driving that. And people are perfectly willing to. Oh, yeah, they're going to go play paintball. Paintball's okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a little bit wrong. It's pretty good. Kids have been good in the past. Kind of petered off lately, but basically kids have been going. We've been running the air gun range for them. They have shotguns from them, archery, cowboy groups there, fishing game, playing dogs, taxidermy, stuff like that. Somebody pays the decoys, but I wonder if you could maybe work in a bit with like the limited. As far as, I don't know, insurance-wise, or pistols or 22 or whatever rifles. We used to do the rifles in our cases and stuff like that also. We discontinued because of insurance.
Yeah, what I can do, for those who are interested in interoperability, is I have my business cards with me. I'll hand out business cards after the meeting, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about that, because that's what we're after. So a whole other area that the CRPA is looking into is how do we interact with like-minded organizations, such as yours? And we need to have a separate conversation later about that, Mark. And DU, there's a lot of affiliated organizations out there. I saw another hand. Yeah.
Just kind of asking, you talked about CRPA versus competitive shooting and NRA shooting. I helped at the Modern Decathlon Championships in Palo Alto, maybe it was 2000. And the guy who was there was not affiliated with the NRA, it was some other organization for the shooting part.
USA probably.
Yeah, and he was saying, well, NRA really isn't into sanctioning shooting sports or isn't functioning well in that area. Did he really mean it was because of the CRPA having...
I can't tell you what somebody else was thinking at the time. What I can say is that NRA has sanctioned shooting for a long, long time. What got taken away from them, and this was interesting, was Olympic shooting.
Okay, this is an Olympic...
And pentathlon certainly is an Olympic event. And I suspect what he was expressing to you was that at one point, Olympic shooting was governed by the NRA in the United States and no longer is. It's now run by a group called USA Shooting.
Right.
And they're two wholly separate organizations that don't have a lot of love.
Aside from a lot of practice, serious practice, how would one start to become involved in competitive shooting?
Show up at a match. Start there. Go to the games. Show up at a match. Decide which ones work for you, which ones look interesting. I mean, to get started in competitive shooting, it depends on the game you want to play and what you like to do. And there are different types. I'll talk about some of the different types. That's a great question. Thank you. So how did I get started in competitive shooting?
How did you get started?
Well, I thought you'd never get started. So as a kid, I thought guns were really neat and interesting, and I wanted to play with them. I liked to play with them, and then I didn't for a long time. I got to be an adult. I joined a local club, and went to some of the different types of matches. And the one that caught on for me and looked interesting was bullseye pistol. This is conventional offhand target pistol shooting. It's an accuracy game. It has a timed component to it, but at the end of the day, it's an accuracy game. Stand and shoot targets offhand. Some people think that's really boring. They'd rather play some of the run and gun games, IDPA, IPSC, etc., where you move, you shoot at moving targets, you shoot from different positions, those kinds of things. If that works for you, great. Go out and play the game. Be involved. I mentioned earlier Single Action Shooting Society. These guys just took off leaps and bounds. They were from IPSC, IDPA. That's where they actually started. They said to themselves one day, well, this is kind of fun. I got a Single Action Army at home, and next week we're going to shoot Single Action Armies instead of our 1911s. And a few of them showed up, and this is the story they tell of it. And they shot the Single Action Armies, and they decided that was pretty good, and they took it from there. So then they brought a lever action rifle, and then they brought their shotguns, and they converted it into a 3-gun game. And they're taking off. And if you've gone to those matches, and I have, they look like a lot of fun. Like way too much fun, so I don't even want to start that game because I've got enough bad habits. Perhaps I mentioned earlier the shotgun sports. Again, these are traditional, classic, been around a long time. Trap and skeet. Most of what you see around here is trap. There are a lot of trap clubs around here. Not a lot. There are more trap clubs than skeet clubs around here. So again, if you're into that, go out and check out the match, watch the game. A lot of people that are playing the games are more than happy for you. Want to try it? Come here. It's just like any good dealer. The first one's free. Hopefully we hook you. After that, you're paying. So that's how that goes. Now you mentioned training. It's interesting. A lot of the games you don't need to do live fire to train for. Dry fire, especially for pistol, I don't do it as much as I should, is very productive. Get a snap cap, get a blank wall, line up the sights, squeeze the trigger, practice breaking the trigger without disturbing the sights. That's the name of the game, because you lose that during recoil, especially if you're shooting on something big. 45, you get a rough idea of what the sights were doing, but you can't really watch. I mean, at 22, you can hold pretty still and watch what the sights were doing. So how do you learn to, first of all, go to the game, get the rule book, learn how the game's played, watch a few, try a couple of them, see which one works for you. The training component, dry fire is a big part of it. Conditioning. Yeah. That can help. Round is a shape, don't kid yourselves. And these are special Never Needs Ironing shirts I get as well. I stole that last bit from Larry Carter, who's a gun dealer up in Maine, who's hilarious, the Never Needs Ironing shirts. But that's how that goes. Other questions?
The NRA magazine Shooting Sports is online now, and it has a schedule of competitive competitions.
Right. We also list the CRPA website will also list some of those. Okay, well, if that does it, I'd like to thank you all for your time tonight.
Skip, I want to thank you very much on behalf of GSTAC. And just as a part of the cross-pollination process, did you attend our barbecue this last year?
No.
Have you been to any of our barbecues? No. Shame on you. All right, let me plant a seed for you. 200 people, tri-tip chicken, pork that falls off the ribs, kielbasa, fresh corn on the cob, fresh watermelon, snow cones. All the cold drinks you can imagine. And I would love to have a CRPA booth. We have the Zoobs and the Santa Clara Rifle Club set up booths. I'd love to feed you and have you out there. So August, the second Saturday in August, and I think it'll be the 13th next year. So consider it a standing offer. If you can send a body or two, bring a banner, I'll get you fatter. Business. Nordyke v. King. As you all know, this morning at 10 a.m., El Jefe Don Kilmer and his team went before the Ninth Circuit Court again to beat them up about the stuff that they're doing with regard to the TNS gun shows and some of the ludicrous statements they're making regarding gun shows, violence, just a lot of silliness up there, and the ability to have a gun show without guns, okay? Fortunately, we had a crew of probably about 14, 15 people that attended the hearing. 2 of them are here tonight to give us a first-hand update. Mr. Kilmer sends his regards and apologizes for not doing it himself. So if I could have Mr. Klopotic and Mr. Stoddard come up and give us an update on what they heard today at court.
Hello. Can't hear me? Okay. The reason that they had the hearing today was back in about 2000 when the original litigation took place. It went back and forth between the federal and state courts. And at the time, there really wasn't a lot of developed Second Amendment the Supreme Court decisions. They basically had stuff going back to the 1800s and so on. So after Heller happened, what happened was the Supreme Court, the United States Court of Appeals said to Alameda County and to the Nordykes, we want you to come back. If you want, we will have another hearing in light of the Heller case. And so briefs were filed. And that was the reason that they had the hearing today, was to go basically take a look at what they wanted to do with the Nordyke case in light of Heller. So it started off at about 10 o'clock. The courtroom would hold about 100 people, and a large number. It was a very interesting case, so they went and the judges had their staffers come in. And the courtroom, their staffers had it pretty full, and there's a lot of people. They had 3 rooms. They had the courtroom plus 2 overflow rooms to accommodate all the people to see the case. And it was very. They had Courtroom Video Network there filming it, and they started about 10 o'clock, and we had on our side, we had Alan Gura, Don Cates, Don Kilmer, and Chuck Michelle, and a number of other attorneys. And so the other side also had their attorneys. And it was very interesting because as to how a appeals court case works, Don got up there, started to try to talk, And then all of a sudden came the peppering with questions. And it was very interesting because they did it to Don, and then when the attorney for Alameda County got up there, they did the same thing to her. And what they did is she tried to start to make a presentation, then it came a whole bunch of questions. Now what was interesting was the methodology in their questioning. What they did was they kind of started off with Don. He tried to make his presentation, then they started saying, well, did you hear about the fact that, let's see how the first one go here, that the Attorney General the Attorney General of the state of California wrote a brief supporting incorporation of the Second Amendment based on Heller. And he said, yes, I do, but he says, do you think did he mention it or did he do anything to have it apply here? And he says, no, they didn't do it. So he noticed that they tested his memory, and then for about the first couple minutes of doing it, they asked him different questions, but then they got to, I think, what they think was the heart of the argument. What they're trying to do is like what Mark was talking about. They're trying to look at, I think there's something, they're trying to use commercial or commerce as a way to apply, commerce as a way to maybe not apply the Second Amendment here. The Interstate Commerce Clause, well, they tried to look at it, they looked at as commerce as a way to maybe not make a decision. Because what's going to happen here, the court could go a number of different ways. They asked Don, do you want us to go back to the lower court and go and have them go and make a decision at the lower court to try to decide if you want to basically ask Alameda if they're going to go and if they're going to, the technical argument here, what they did was Alameda, it was a big argument. What happened was Alameda was supposed to, they said we don't want to have guns at the gun show, or we don't have gun shows on the fairgrounds because of the fact that it's a critical area, like an airport or a mall. And so they said, they asked Don if they wanted to go back and rehear the case based on the fact that they did not declare that area a critical area. Don said, no, we don't want to do that. Then they said, well, how about, what about the fact that there are other areas out there? Can we go and say that, well, so what if we don't have Alameda? What about other areas that have gun shows? Could the Nordikes go to other places to have gun shows? And he said, well, Your Honor, after Alameda said, no, we don't want to have gun shows here, then he went off and he rattled off a list of about 6 other places in the immediate area here, like Santa Cruz, the Cow Palace, Marin County, and a few others that said that they weren't going to have gun shows either. He said that we have to take a look at this because if we let this one stand and all those others stand, then we don't have a place to hold gun shows. Then they asked him, what about, do we want, if it's, the fact that he got into Don's arguments about the fact that they could not, what Alameda wanted you to do was basically have guns behind a display, and one of the judges said that this is kind of like saying, you're going to take somebody out to go out for breakfast, and all you can do is sit there and stare at the food. He said, this doesn't make sense. And they actually got a bunch of laughs out of the audience. Then the heart of the big argument they wanted to get to Don, and this was interesting because when they're asking Don's questions, it was like they looked at his briefs and they said that this guy knew what he was talking about. His arguments are sound, and what they did is they asked him a number of questions to sit there and say, well, if we did this, how would this affect you? If we did that, how would it affect you? And when it came to dealing with Alameda's attorney's arguments, it was more like, do you really know what you're talking about? And the reason they say that is because they did the same thing to her. What they did was they started off with a few, have you heard this, have you heard that?
Who's her?
I did not get her name.
Was she an attorney?
The attorney, she was the attorney for Alameda County. Sarah, what was that? Weaver, Sarah Weaver. And they started off asking her a number of questions, but the one that was really interesting when they started to get into the meat of the discussion, they asked her, are you aware that the Attorney General says we should incorporate the Second Amendment into the state constitution, that it's something that the Supreme Court should do? And she said, or the judge asked her, is Alameda in conformity with the California Attorney General's position? And she said, no. And then the whole audience, the whole room cracked up. And then from there, it went down where they started taking, instead of asking her questions as to how her questions as to if we did this, how this affect you, they're basically saying we're looking at your arguments and we're really having a hard time trying to decide which way to go here. Saying things like, what do we have to do if, or how can you say, on one hand you sit there and say, Heller says we can do this, but then you later on argue that Heller doesn't apply here because it only applies to DC and not the states. How can we look at your arguments and how can you square that? And they asked her to do it, she kind of hemmed and hawed, tried to say, well, it's only this or only that. And then she tried to bring up the fact that, well, we really need this because of the fact that there's crimes going on. You have guns, you have kids, and she mentioned the fact that they had a shooting there where 11 people were injured they had a concert or something, and one of the judges.
She didn't reveal that.
She didn't reveal it, and one of the judges made the point of asking that question to go and reinforce the fact that it didn't happen at a gun show. And previously, Don had outlined the fact that gun shows are very heavily regulated, that guns are brought in, that people are screened, that there's background checks on people that have tables. And the judges are actually doing a better job, or doing a fairly good job of backing up Don. And from the nature of the questions that they were asking her, it kept going that basically her arguments, they didn't like the logic of her arguments. They were saying, well, if we applied your logic here, this would apply to all government buildings, and that could possibly be a problem. And they basically went down like that. And so and it was really good to see it because on one hand, they looked at Don's discussion, and the nature of the questions were more like, how would these facts affect your case? And with the Alameda attorney, it was like, we're really having a hard time trying to figure out what you're trying to argue here. And so it did sound like from what I saw in the analysis of the questions, it sounded like it went rather well for Don. How this is going to play out later on in the actual decision, well, it remains to be seen.
The previous decision by the Circuit Court of Appeals was a loss on the issue of holding the gun shows, but it gave us the win of incorporating the Second Amendment.
Right, all three, every time it went to court.
Within the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So when they filed to review or rehear the case, do the en banc review, which was generated not by the plaintiffs or the defendants, but by the court itself, someone in the court itself. I sort of got I assumed it was because some of the judges in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, oh my God, we incorporated the Second Amendment in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, we've got to stop that. But what I'm hearing from the way the hearing went, it sounds like they're leaning towards actually giving the Nordikes a win on the issue of the gun show and keeping the incorporation.
The way the questions were going was, one, the county of Alameda said we don't want to have guns here because of the fact that it's a fairgrounds and it's not a place. It's a place where we have kids. It's a place where we have families. We don't want to have It's like a mall or an airport, or it's a government facility, and because of that, you can't kind of restrict. You just can't set up and do free speech type things in an airport, okay? Because of the fact that it's dedicated to flying and getting and moving people. They tried to use that argument, but the fact of the matter was, they said, well, Alameda never got around to actually, by law, declaring it a special area, in a sensitive area. And so what happened was, that was one issue that they're talking about. We're thinking about, let's send this back down to go and have it redecided based on the fact that you did not decide to have it declared sensitive. The other one is that we're deciding whether or not we should incorporate it just on a straight Second Amendment incorporation issue a la Heller. Or number 3, maybe we might go and try to tippy-toe around it because of the fact that this isn't, and this was really interesting because one of the arguments that came out was that if you have a gun, it may not necessarily be a weapon because you don't intend to use it as a weapon. And because you're going to the gun show to go and trade it, that this is commerce. This isn't involving Second Amendment rights. And so they're looking, and that's what I'm saying, is that it's those three, they were discussing those 3 issues in their questions to the
Okay, was there any supposition or claim by Don Kilmer or his co-counsel that the fact that they had declared this ban without bothering to declare the fairgrounds a sensitive area, that this was in fact proof that the original intent was to infringe on the Second Amendment, infringe on the First Amendment? Was there any sort of accusation?
No, they didn't get into those details.
Let me do this before we go to more questions. Let's go ahead and let's get Kevin up here, get his side, and then once again we can tandem up and get the questions answered from there. Okay.
Possible answer to your question was, yes, there may have been a nefarious judge that wanted this, and he had to find 12 of his friends to agree to have the case reheard. Don told us at the last meeting what the procedure was to force the court to do the rehearing. He said that any judge, any active, not senior, judge on the court, any one of the 27, could approach his buddies, and if he could find 13 of them to agree, he could force the rehearing. It was secret ballot. We'd never know the names of the people. Now, that may have been how it occurred, but that person couldn't force his people to be in the court today, because the only one that was forced there was Kaczynski, the chief judge, and the other 10 were chosen by lottery.
Okay.
All right, so a person, one of those judges may have been the precipitator of that, but it doesn't mean he was even in the room today. The other element was that one of the arguments apparently in the current briefs by Alameda was this quote-unquote sensitive labeling of the fairgrounds. And luckily, Keller had saved 2 minutes and 32 seconds from his original 30. You're only allowed 30 each. He reserved the last 2:32 for rebuttal. And the lady in red, as I'll refer to her from Alameda, did not. So when she was all done, he stood up and pointed out that sensitive, the terminology, came out of Heller. Heller only happened within the last year or so. It can't be used as an argument. It had to have been in the original brief 10 years ago. It was a procedural error. He embarrassed her. Okay. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, I'd like to give you a feeling of what it was like just to be there, okay, rather than what you just heard. So a different slice through the thing. Okay, it's a beautiful building that humbles you as soon as you walk in. Extremely high ceilings, very quiet, almost no people present. You know, it's like, what's happened here in history? And I'm just this little person who walked in. You get into the courtroom and you find out that, oh my God, it's all reserved. And there's one seat left in the back row, and I get to sit in it. This was a good thing. Right? There are 150 law clerks that support the judges in the Ninth Circuit, and they were all invited. Right? So every row but the back row was already cordoned off, and even the church, they're like church pews, very uncomfortable. They brought in folding chairs. They filled up immediately, but they were all lawyers and clerks. Right? Members of the public basically got overflow. If you weren't there before 9, you didn't make it in. Back to walking in the building, the first thing you see is this elevator that looks like Doris Day should step off it from a movie in Paris. All right, it's beautiful. The whole place is just elegant. You get into the courtroom, it's awesome ceilings, marble. I can't remember the technical term for all the carved decorations, but it's absolutely beautiful. It was built, 100 plus years ago at a cost of $2.5 million, and then it was renovated, and of course our government can't renovate for anything less than it was built for. It cost $94 million to renovate. In the historical document that you could get if you asked for it when you walked through the metal detector, it explained that there was a bullet hole in the, what's the bench called? The bench. There you go. And so, of course, several of us who had become aware of that just couldn't wait for the for the hearing to be over so that we could see the bullet hole. They've repaired it, but it's still there. It appears that quite a few years ago there was a case and somebody sitting in the audience didn't like one of the witnesses, so as he was testifying, they shot him. The bullet went through him and entered the bench about 9 inches below the top of the table, right in front of the chief judge. Okay. None that was aware. None that I was aware of. Okay, something to understand. When you first walk in, you expect to see Perry Mason, Law and Order, all the TV show-like stuff. Okay? But you don't. It's not a trial. There's no witnesses. There's no evidence. Right? There's no bloody knife. There's no gun with the detectives and mark on it, all this good stuff. What's her name from CSI hasn't presented any blood evidence. Nothing.
No trunk and glove.
You look up front from my perch in the back of the room, and you see 4 luminaries sitting at the table, right? Kilmer, Kate, Gura, and Michelle, and it's like, wow, this is, must be something important here today. This must be serious, exactly. Okay. Kilmer, as explained, each lawyer got 30 minutes. Kilmer's job was to open. And I think he spoke for 5 seconds and he was interrupted. Every time both sides tried to make a presentation, the judges were rude, argumentative, everything that you would see in a normal court case that would be objected to. And in every case, the lawyers were polite and almost said, "Thank you, sir, for interrupting me, because what choice do you have? You're playing at their table. It's the only table that matters." And so the original, not insult, but challenge to Kilmer, which, was just, "Hello, my name's Don Kilmer, may it please the court. Wait a minute, what do you think about this?" And the jab had to do with the California Constitution. Right? One of the judges said, "Are you aware that the original California Constitution," and he couldn't remember what year it was confirmed, neither can I, but he said, "doesn't have a Second Amendment." And Don said he was aware. And he said it was reincorporated, so many years later. And when it was reincorporated, it didn't have a Second Amendment. Are you aware? And Don acknowledged that he was. And so the judge said, "Well, doesn't that give you the idea that maybe California doesn't want a Second Amendment?" How do you respond to that?
No.
Right? Well, he was mute. There was no good answer. Right? And a number of the questions that he was baited with, and so was the lady in red, were ones that you should keep your mouth shut. Although in some cases, when he kept his mouth shut, they kept saying, "No, we want your opinion. You can't say you don't know. You have to give us an opinion." Let's see. Another judge said to Mr. Kilmer, Where will today's decision take us? What is your hidden agenda? Pardon me? Okay, I didn't recognize a lot of the names of the judges, and we didn't get a list of them until we were leaving. Anyway, he said, Mr. Kilmer, what's your opinion? If we agree with you today, will that put more guns on the street or less? And Don didn't want to answer, and he wouldn't let him not answer. Eventually, Don suggested that there was reason to believe, and you never tell the judge what he ought to know. You always say something nice like, it might be kind of stuff, right? You never say it like you know better than they, because you'll get slapped.
Don't say
Instead, he said something like, there's reason to believe that it would make no difference. And they let him off the hook on that one. They asked him whether or not Heller, quote, fully absorbed, unquote, argued for a reversal of Nordyke. And I don't think there was a good answer to that. I'll skip over some more things that you already heard about. The next one was by a different judge, don't know his name or her name. There were 2 women in the panel, by the way. Oh, yeah. At the beginning of this room now has like 100 people. I'm sorry to go back in time, but there's like 100 people in the room, and they're all chatting. You can imagine if everybody in here multiplied by 2 in a space half this size, and it's just noisy as all get out, right? It's like a bunch of kids in the school lunchroom. And all of a sudden, this diminutive black woman in the front drops her gavel, and in mid-syllable, the room is quiet. I mean, 100 mostly men with big egos, they're lawyers, right? No offense, but that's what they were. All of a sudden, there was absolute congruence to that woman's gavel. It was amazing. So much so that when she left the room, I had to stop her and say, I'm really impressed at your gavel obedience. And she said, yeah, she was too. It doesn't normally work that way. She said, no, it really worked. And I said, well, if you won't take offense, I'd just like to say, you're the man. She didn't hurt me, so I guess it was okay.
You're awesome.
Anyway, another judge, don't know the name, maybe you do, said, and I quote, why do you need guns at gun shows? Quote unquote. And he followed that up with, why do you think that the county's regulation regulating guns at gun shows is any different than when the county decides where in certain places you can have certain things? For example, a county can say where exotic dancers can dance and where they can't, right? The Pink Pussycat can't be in a residential neighborhood. Adult bookstores can only be where they're told they can be. What's the difference in the rationale for guns? Let's see, another one. Okay, Don used up his 28 minutes. At the end, they were peppering him with questions from, and I'll use your term, from Crookshank and Presser, and accusing Don of labeling them as moribund. I guess that means no longer applicable, but and another one called Slaughterhouse. I wasn't familiar with Slaughterhouse. Anyway, Don's time was up, and he specifically said he wanted all 2 minutes and 32 seconds for later. So then the lady in red stands up, and she says that Presser says that Second Amendment only restrains Congress. And the judge says, well, if I extend your argument, then California could ban all guns, even in the home, right? And she was kind of, well, no. She goofed, and the judge caught her. Then what was mentioned earlier, one of the judges said, I think the term was organization.
Yes.
This guy had trouble with the English language. Oh, and I got to back up, sorry again, to the beginning. There's the chief judge, and there's normally the 3 judges on this upper bench. Then there's a lower bench with all the rest of them, except for the one guy who apparently is crippled, and he was on a video monitor from some other room. And he probably is in physically very bad shape because people were holding his water cup for him, like Stephen Hawking would take a drink. And I don't recall that he ever spoke a word, and I don't recall that he even moved his head.
But he's one of our guys.
Ah. Okay, so his opinion may count later, but he did nothing at the hearing. No participation. Okay, sorry. Now back to the lady in red's up there, and one of the judges says, your organization is a political subdivision of the state, right? Well, yes, sir. Yes, Your Honor. He says, well, aren't you aware that, I think it was in an earlier version of this case, that Jerry Brown has filed this amicus brief, and he's in favor of incorporation. And so, how can you be against him? Well, there's no good answer to that, right? And the audience cracked. Well, but it got worse. After him asking her, are you in conflict with the Attorney General? She was forced to answer yes. And the judge comes back and says, I won't tell him. And at this point, I think that she thought that he was friendly to her. He didn't get it, that he was mocking her. So she comes back in a friendly manner and says, well, I suppose he'll find out somehow. And the judge then, after having lured her in, sets the hook. And he says, I don't think he'll care. I mean, she might have dropped out of view at that point, right? My estimation, slightly different from yours, I think that it was a favorable day based on the humiliation that was applied to the lady in red. Don, I think, was tested. He was put in a crucible and found to have the metal to withstand the heat. She, on the other hand, and I'll get to another one, there's one more to go. Anyway, this really, he probably won't care. This just elicited a bunch of laughter, and never did any of the judges restrain our laughter. There was never any order in the court. It was as if they had encouraged us to do so. And we never, of course, laughed at Don. Okay, another judge says, how can the county enact this ordinance which directly repudiates Justice Scalia writings in the Heller decision, which held that prohibiting gun ownership violates the Second Amendment? And she said the ruling doesn't apply. And her basis for the ruling not applying was the purpose of guns at the gun show. You talk about narrow. Apparently, and I guess it makes sense to us, Heller said that you can have a gun in your home for the narrow purpose of self-defense. At the gun show, Don has never asserted that guns present there are for self-defense. And so the county lawyer's position was, Heller doesn't apply. You're shaking your head in the horizontal plane.
That's because the decision said Americans have the right to have guns for traditionally lawful purposes such as self-defense within the home. And commerce, buying and selling of private property would be traditionally lawful purpose.
Okay.
That's literally what the decision said.
But that's not what they said the decision was at the hearing.
They were mistaken.
Okay.
Trust me. I know what that decision was.
The lady in red said that the decision was it was only self-defense in the home, and because Mr. Kilmer had not asserted that as a desire at the gun show, that Heller did not give protection to the Nordics.
He missed a huge opportunity.
Okay. Well, he couldn't speak. He's not allowed to pop up and just say, you lie. So, I wanted to do it, but I knew I'd spend a night in jail, and so I didn't do it. I believe he did rebut that in his 2 minutes and 32 seconds. But at that moment, he had to sit there and grin and bear it, and he was studying stuff, and later he gets, I'll get to what he does when he gets back up there. Okay, I gotta get out of here because Mark's gonna shoot me, but let's see. So then after we went through that little discussion, and many of these little vignettes never had conclusions. They left you hanging. It was like the last episode of a TV show at the end of the season. You gotta tune in later to find out what's gonna happen next, and you never, we may never know until the decision. Okay. As mentioned before, this lawyer, Ms. Weaver, Lady in Red, talked about, again, emphasizing the sensitive nature and the family participation at things or at the fairgrounds and all that stuff, and the terrible shooting that 8 people went to the hospital with gunshot wounds and 11 people overall were hurt.
4 were children.
And somehow the children, it's for the children. And a lot of people are beginning to feel like, oh, okay, we're going down here because kids already got hurt, hospital, gunshot wounds, blood and gore, all that good stuff. And then out of the blue, this one judge in the back to the right of Kaczynski, who had difficulty with forming a paragraph, but occasionally he was pithy. And at this moment, he asked, did that shooting happen at a gun show? And we all knew the answer because there hadn't been a gun show there in 10 years, right? And this was like a year ago. And she just realized that she had just dug another hole, walked right in, and she had to say, no, it didn't. And then, for some totally inexplicable reason, she went on to say, the record shows there has never been violence at a gun show. Like she was on our team. Couldn't believe it. Because remember, you're not allowed to introduce evidence. This is a hearing. It's only on the procedure and on precedents, existing law, all the stuff. You can't, it's not Perry Mason with, don't you want to admit you did it? None of that's applicable. Okay. So it was at this point, actually, this is the chronological point where the judge said about your ordinance seems to indicate that you want people to go to a gun show and only look at guns under glass. Kind of like going to a restaurant and observing the menu and then going home. And of course, she didn't have an answer. It's like the court breaks up in laughter and nobody stops us.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it's Don's turn again, and he explains how sensitive places, that doctrine was invented in the decision for Heller, and therefore can't be introduced today as an argument because new arguments don't come today. Remember, we're on precedent and decisions and that kind of stuff. You had to put that in the argument 10 years ago. Oops, Lady in Red's caught on another mistake. Let's see. Then one of the judges, okay, this is the final humiliation. One of the judges asked Don, well, how do these Scottish Games occur? Because it was brought up earlier that the Scottish Games are able to conform with an exception that was written in the law. Originally, they couldn't conform. They wrote an exception. And this had come up under earlier discussion with the Lady in Red. But Don's up there. So it doesn't matter whether it's your argument or the other team's argument. If you're standing at the podium, the bullets come at you. So this bullet was aimed at Don, but it was a really great one because he ricocheted. They asked him, how is it that the Scottish Games can comply with the ordinance? And Don said, well, there's a clause that has a vague description that only, quote, authorized participants, unquote, can handle the guns. And it had already been described that at the games, the guns are actually discharged. Now they're blanks, but gee whiz, you might have a live round sneak in there somewhere, whereas at a gun show, right, nobody fires any guns. And I think it was Kaczynski at the end, right, the chief judge, he says, well, there you have it. And we're thinking, uh-oh. And he says, all you have to do, Mr. Kilmer, is advise your client that at all future gun shows, when they sell a ticket, on the ticket it should say, "This ticket authorizes you to be a participant." He says that will solve your problem in meeting the ordinance, and it will solve our problem in the court. Oh, and then of course, before anybody could say anything at all, right in the middle of the laughter, the gavel falls. Question?
Could you tell if the questions that were for or against our side, or, you know, you might interpret that, if they came from particular judges, or was it just kind of hit and miss?
Yeah, I would say that I didn't keep score in that manner, but I think it would be fair to say that there, with the exception of Kaczynski, who was the chief judge, who shot, you know, he'd shoot anybody. I think you could probably argue that some judges were pro and some were con, and they were trying to make their point, and some, you know, didn't participate much at all.
Well, the other thing too you have to realize is that one of the things that they're trying to do is they want to try to get the truth out of you, and so what they're basically doing is a real quick try to get you, maybe, you know, in a presentation type thing, get you a little bit off guard, or else make you feel good, kind of easy. Then they hit you with that interview question that sets you back, and then try to make sure you're telling the truth and or not trying to cover something up. And so it's really hard to tell. You know, it might be you don't know the reason you don't really know the reason for the question, and you know, we couldn't tell. The only thing we couldn't really tell, like from individuals, as to who really represented what side. Maybe there's like one judge that seemed like it was obvious, but by and large, most of the questions you really couldn't tell why they were being asked. But the big interesting thing was, though, that there was a difference in the tenor of the questions that were asked to Don versus the ones that were asked to the lady in red. And it was like basically Don knew his stuff, and they asked him, you know, factual questions, whereas they were trying to figure out what the county of Alameda was trying to request in this case.
I'll limit it to another 5 minutes, so then we need to start closing things down.
Was the, I guess the state attorney, the lady in red, was she obviously inexperienced? Is it possible the judges were playing with her and trying to get her to become more experienced at this type of thing? Or did she just seem to be kind of not knowing what she was talking about?
I think she had a less tenable position.
Okay, I was just wondering, because that would explain why the judges had a different tone.
I think there were kind of three things going on. I think her position was less tenable than everybody in the room knew it.
Right.
And they wanted to press Don to make sure there wasn't something they were missing. And I got a sense that they didn't really want to make this decision. On at least 2, maybe 3 occasions, they offered to posit that, couldn't we just certify this, like bump it up to the next court? Or send it back down. They wanted to go up or down. They wanted to kick the can down the road, and they didn't care if it went up or down. They wanted to get off the hot seat.
Last 2 questions.
It's like a coincidence to me that the name of the courthouse is
James R. Browning. It should have been John M. Browning, but it was close. Yeah. Somebody who hasn't got to ask. Go for it.
I was there today. My question, when you brought up the judge hammering Don about what his agenda, he said his agenda so many times, it's not even an answer. So I was
Sorry, you gotta speak up. I can't hear you.
The question was, he kept, as I mentioned earlier, one of the early assaults on Don was, what's your hidden agenda? And how many guns, how many more, or how many less? Will this restrict our ability to regulate, or will this increase our ability to regulate? You know, what are you doing here?
Don handled the question, but I was just hearing your last comment about the court either wanted to set it up by certifying it, or just to send it back down and have it retried.
Well, they wanted to know if there was more, if they sent it down, there would be more discovery. And Kilmer instantly said, there's nothing more to learn. We know everything there is to know. It's all in the brief.
My question, our strategy, we want the Supreme to hear this.
Which Supremes?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not pontificate.
Yeah, one of the things that, one of the decisions they had to make, that they still could make, is to say, okay, we're going to incorporate the Second Amendment via Heller into the Ninth Circuit. That was one of the options.
So that's what I thought, what's the hidden agenda, what's the hidden agenda?
Who knows? You're talking
I don't think we knew, and I don't even know that it was a reasonable question. It was. I think it was more of the. I'm going to ask you a question. You know, when have you stopped beating your wife?
Yeah.
How do you?
How was the lower ballroom TVs?
Yeah. Well, what was interesting was that apparently there's 2 cases in the Seventh Circuit and 1 in the Second Circuit. Did I get that right? There's 3 more cases, and they were saying like, boy, wouldn't it be? I'm making these words up. Wouldn't it be neat if those 3 plus ours get it off our plate and let the Supremes do it?
All right, gentlemen, well, thank you very much. Thank you for taking time out of your business day to go to the hearing. I wish I could have been there myself. Okay.